Well, Burton Lauppe, and I'm part of the Lauppe clan, which is my grandfather, Lauppe Lane. My grandfather lived at the end of that down there, and the rest of that was pasture there. And Fred and Julie Rush lived here, and I was 13 before I found out they weren't married. I thought, but they were brother and sister. And my grandmother was a Boley, and Grandpa Boley had, I think it was 5 daughters and 1 boy, and the boy ended up in Oregon, and I guess he couldn't get along with all the girls, so he went to Oregon, grew up in Hempner. And the girls all married around here locally. One of them was a Brown, and one of them married this Fred Rush, or well, I guess it was Fred, I'm not sure. But anyhow, the Rush, that's how the Rush married one of the daughters, one of the Boley daughters, and she died right after they got married, I guess. So then he married the other Boley daughter. So there was two Boleys there married to the Rush. And when great-grandpappy Boley died, well, I guess all the ranch reverted to Rush, and since then it was the Rush place. And I remember Fred and Dad used to farm the place here. Oh, some of the ground here east, there weren't any trees. I remember, I was about 7 years old. We had a place on Baird Lane, and Dad bought a property down in Natomas, and Natomas in those days in the wintertime, if you got off of the power line road, you were stuck in the mud. So he'd farm down there in the summertime, and then he'd come back up here to his 17 acres of walnuts on, I think it was 17 or 20, someplace, anywhere right next to from the highway back on Baird Lane. And we'd spend the winter here. And so I went to Sylvan Corner for the first year of my life, when I was about 7 years old. And about that time in the 30s, my dad Dad and Uncle Raymond used to farm together, and they bought a John Deere from Charles, who ran this hardware store in Roseville. And they drove that tractor off the flat car and down the old Auburn Road here, and we were out here in the field putting the grousers on, and we just flat round wheels and steel wheels, and they started putting the grousers on, and I could there with Dad, and I could smell that green paint burning, and I wanted to drive that tractor. And so he let me harrow in the wheat on this piece. Well, there's about 80 acres here west of the house. And mainly because I couldn't hit anything. There weren't any trees there or anything. And I always think of that today when there's nothing but houses over there now, all boomed up. But then we would, Dad and Uncle Raymond used to farm up here, grain land. And they would have an old 45 tractor, and of course they needed that down in the district in the summertime, so they'd walk that down through, just drive it down the road. You couldn't haul it in those days. We didn't have trucks big enough. So they drove it down the road through Rio Linda and out into the district, and it took them all day, 3 miles an hour, And that's how they farmed. But I remember Julia here, she always had, for us kids, we always had ice cream in the refrigerator. I think she had Fred and Julie had the first refrigerator in the district around here. The rest of them were either ice boxes or just coolers in the cooler in their pantry, which was nothing but screen shelves, and all the way down to the basement it was open all the way up, so you'd get the cool from the basement for the cooler. But they had a refrigerator, one with a dome on top, I remember, and people I knew they'd always keep ice cubes in their in their trays. But Julie would always have ice cream in that, and I can still see her dishing the ice cream out of that ice cream box. And Fred was still farmed around here. Well, he sold hay and different things out of the barn, but I don't remember. I was pretty young, 7 years old or so I don't remember too much. But I remember coming Fred and Julie's place. We'd come here, and there was a big oak tree out in front, and she had violets planted all the way around that thing, and I remember those things. They stood out as part of the ranch. And there's a picture of the Boley Ranch when it was in one of the California magazine book. The fellas come around in those days, and you paid them so much, why they drew a stereotype of your ranch and everything. And this was in that book, and it had the ducks swimming out in the pond out in the front and everything, so it was pretty realistic. But other than that, I can't, well, Fred had hay, and he'd sell hay, bale at a time, I guess, out of the barn, along with, he didn't have too much of a dairy. I know he just one or two cows, I think, one cow that I know of, anyhow, to make the ice cream, but that was about it. And my grandmother was a Boley, and he married Rudolph Lauppe, which is, he had property across the street here. I don't know how they got together, but they were awful close. And I remember going down Lauppe Lane to get into his house. Why, it was always my job to get out and open the gates. I think there were 3 different gates in the pasture going into Rudolph's place. And most of the brush was open ground out here in the back. So that was easier to farm. It was all grain land. And in those days, my grandfather, he had to quit high school when he was 13 because his dad worked for the railroad and went to Oregon, and so he stayed home. And he was running the ranch, and in those days it was all grain, dry farming, and he started an insurance company with the different grain growers around there. It was kind of a co-op, and that was the farmers' insurance company, really. And I don't think it's related to the farmers' big one now, but it was called that anyhow in those days. And it was just a co-op of the people that raised grain around here, which came in handy when they had a fire. The big hay barn was over here, and it was a 1x12 clapboard, up and typical, and a hay mow up above. Well, the cows could come in on the side, and they'd throw the hay down from the top. And it was used a Jackson fork to get the hay up into it was loose hay in those days. They weren't baled, it was just an old Jackson fork, and the horse would pull it up into the hay mow and get in there, and then you'd trip it, and it would dump the hay up in there, loose hay. And in the wintertime, that's what they shoveled it down to the cow. And of course, everything was by hand. You had to shovel it out then as manure. So you had a good job, permanent job.